Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm going to be testing Yakuza 0 on the Geforce GTX 750 Ti. I'll be doing 1080p, 1440p and 4K. To skip any of those sections of the video, check the timestamps down in the description. So I didn't test 900p or 720p, since at 1080p with maximum settings we're already over 60 frames per second, at least a big majority of the time. So just expect over 60 frames per second on 900p and 720p. The game runs really well. So on 1080p I'll be using the maximum settings, and once again, as I said, you're pretty much at 60 frames per second all the time. Then when I switched to 1440p and 4K, I had to overclock the GPU. I added 200 MHz to the core and 400 MHz to the VRAM. So yeah, keep that in mind. On 1080p the overclock is disabled. At 1440p I still try to get 60 frames per second. In order to be close to that target, I just disabled FXAA, lower shadows to medium, and geometry to high, and that was enough to do just that, with some drops every now and then, but nothing major if you ask me, completely playable. And finally at 4K, it was impossible to get 60 frames per second, so I just put shadows on low, geometry on high, disabled FXAA, and I was over 30 frames per second the big majority of the time. When a lot of effects show up, it can drop below 30 frames per second, but in those cases you're not usually in control of the game, so I didn't take it as a big deal. If you don't care about 30 frames per second, just play at 4K. The game looks significantly sharper. I remember in cutscenes or when you switch fight styles or something like that, when there's a lot of effects on screen, you can quickly drop below 30 and then go back up. In the options menu, the options that gave me the worst performance, first of all, were SSAA, which is super sampling anti-aliasing. Is one of the most demanding anti-aliasing solutions out there, so I recommend you avoid this one unless you have a very high-end GPU and you're playing on 1080p or something like that. Then FXAA quality is not a big impact in performance, but if you want a couple extra frames, it's a good option to turn off. Then shadow quality is the other one that really makes a difference in performance. To lower it from ultra to high, you don't get much of a difference in performance, but once you hit medium or low on shadows, that's when you see the massive difference in performance. Then the geometry quality didn't make much of a difference in performance to me, but if you lower it, you'll see significantly more pop in on the objects at the sides of the street, so I recommend you keep this on ultra or high. And that's pretty much the options menu. SSAA, once again, just avoid it. Even if you have a 1050 Ti, for example, and you want to see less aliasing, just use DSR from the Nvidia control panel, force 1440p, and you'll see better edges. In my opinion, that's a better option, and you'll notice across all my videos that the frame times are very inconsistent, because when I get very high frame rates, it usually lowers the GPU usage, especially on the i3-8100 and G4560. It's kind of random, it happens while you're running around in the city. So in the consistency side of things, the G4560 versus the i3-8100, it wasn't a huge difference. The G4560 sometimes had rougher drops in the frame time when we were running around, but overall I didn't see a huge difference. So if you want better performance, I will get something that has higher clock speed or more cores. Other than that, you have some extra frame time spikes. You can still play the game just fine. And this was originally a PS3 game, then we got a PS4 version in English, but the PS3 version remained in Japan. So in some ways it was to be expected to get this kind of performance. And one weird thing that happened to me was when using ultra settings, when the street fight starts, for some reason you get a higher frame rate. I'm not sure why, but it always happens using ultra settings. You'll notice that on my 1050 Ti and 750 Ti videos is where it's the most obvious difference. As an example, on the 750 Ti, I was on 1080p max settings. I was between 55 and 60 frames per second. The fight started, it went up to 65 frames per second, and then when I was just running around the city, I was no longer below 60 frames per second. So there's something weird going on with that. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video, thanks for watching and see you next time.
Cut! その目つきが気に食わねえ。後悔する。何食って育ったんだ。俺にガンつけた。やんな。人間じゃねえよ、あんた。よろしく。おお。そこは適当に合わせといてさ。会社欲しいな。よかったじゃん。勘弁してください。が気に入らねえんだよ。なんなんだ。町で殺しがあったらしいな。お前ふざけんなよ。ちょっと会社の。お前モテないだろ。お前死ぬぞこれ。やっ頼む、許してくれ。よろしく。おお。 何なんだ。バカな。もう許せ。お前の体どうなってんだ。手が向かって申し訳ございません。申し訳ございません。今何してんの？おお。そこは適当に合わせてください。お前モテないだろ。ちょっと試してみろ。あいつ。おい、お前。どこ行こうか。とりあえず金出せ。後悔するね。せいや。どうか。調子乗ってました。私はクズです。お前ふざけんなよ。ありゃ全然ダメだ。その面気に食わねえな。後悔するぞ。せいや。もういいだね。俺がバカだった。すまん。お前死ぬぞこれ。邪魔だ。勘弁してくれ。この通りだ。お前ふざけんなよ。会社欲しいな。お前死ぬぞこれ。後悔するな。せいや。 頼む、許してくれ。おお、